Dark clouds rolled across the sky of Haven 9 like boiling ink. The wind howled through the metallic towers of the colony, bending antennas and shaking glass domes. It was not just a storm. It was one of those angry ion tempests that turned the air into fire. People hurried into shelters as the alarms screamed across the base. Captain Elias Rourke stood on the landing pad, his eyes squinting against the red flashes in the clouds. The storm was growing faster than predicted. The sky looked alive, lightning crawling in every direction, electric blue veins tearing the horizon apart. He had seen storms like this before, but this one was different. It felt personal, almost as if the planet itself wanted to test him. Through the comm channel came the urgent voice of control. "Captain Rourke, we've received a distress beacon, Sector Theta, Outpost 6. The scientist there is trapped." Elias frowned. Sector Theta. That was far beyond the safe zone. "Who's the scientist?" he asked, pulling on his flight gloves. "Dr. Lyra Thane, Xenobiology Division." Her shelter collapsed. "The storm's already at Category 5. Elias looked up again at the flashing clouds. No one could survive out there long. He pressed the transmit button, prepping the Falcon for launch. There was silence, then the worried voice of control. "Captain, we can't authorize that. Visibility 0. "You won't make it in or out," Elias smiled faintly, a tired, knowing smile. "I'll make it." Before they could reply, he cut the link and ran toward the sleek rescue shuttle parked near the edge of the pad. The Falcon 3 was old but reliable, a machine he trusted more than most people. As he climbed inside, the wind slammed the hull. Lightning cracked nearby, shaking the ground. Inside the cockpit, the hum of the engines felt like a heartbeat. He strapped in, checking controls with calm precision. His co-pilot's seat was empty now, had been for months. The memory still stung. Not this time, he thought. No one dies today. The thrusters roared to life. The ship lifted off, cutting through sheets of rain and fire. The colony disappeared beneath him, swallowed by clouds. Inside the storm, it was chaos. The wind screamed at 200 kilometers an hour. Electric arcs crawled across the canopy like snakes of light. The Falcon's instruments flickered and glitched as magnetic interference rose. Elias flew by instinct, not trusting the radar, not trusting the sensors. Just his eyes and experience. He could almost feel the air currents through the ship, like the pulse of a living beast. His hands were steady, his face calm. "Hang on, Dr. Thane," he muttered. "I'm coming." The distress signal beeped weakly on the screen, a faint blue dot fading in and out. He followed it until the shape of Outpost 6 appeared through the storm, half buried under debris. Parts of its dome were gone, torn open like paper. Sparks flew from broken pylons. Elias landed hard, the Falcon shaking violently. The storm threw dust and fire around him, but he grabbed his emergency pack and stepped out into the fury. His boots sank into wet ground as wind tried to throw him off balance. Lightning flashed, and in that brief light he saw her. A woman crouched near the collapsed dome, trapped under a metal frame. Her white research suit was stained with dirt, her helmet cracked but still holding pressure. She was trying to lift the beam but didn't have the strength. Elias pushed through the storm and reached her. "Dr. Thane?" he shouted through the static. She looked up, startled, her eyes wide through the glass of her helmet. "Captain Rourke?" "You shouldn't be here." The storm, he didn't let her finish. He gripped the metal frame, braced his legs, and pulled with all his strength. The beam shifted, then fell aside with a metallic scream. Lyra tried to stand, but stumbled, and her leg was hurt. Elias caught her before she fell. "You're safe now," he said firmly. "Let's go." "But the data cores," she cried, pointing to the lab behind the wreck. "They have years of research. If we lose them..." Elias looked at the structure, flames flickering inside. He shook his head. "You can't replace a human life," he said. "We'll come back for them later." Lyra wanted to argue, but when she saw his determined eyes through his fogged visor, she nodded. He guided her back toward the ship, shielding her from debris and wind. They reached the Falcon just as a lightning strike exploded nearby, blinding white. The ship's systems flickered, alarms screaming. He pushed her inside and sealed the hatch. The Falcon lifted again, but the engines were struggling. Lightning danced across the wings. The sensors overloaded. The storm was eating everything. Radio, navigation, even light itself. Elias took manual control, his hands moving quickly over the flight sticks. "Hold on," he shouted. The ship jolted violently as turbulence hit. Lyra gripped the seat, eyes wide. "Are we going to make it?" Elias gave a small grin. I don't plan on dying today. The shuttle shot upward through flashing clouds, the thunder rumbling like the roar of an angry god. Then with a sharp crack and one of the engines went out. Warning lights turned red. The ship began to spin. Elias, she cried. He pulled the controls, muscles straining. Stay with me. The Falcon broke through the worst of the storm, but it was too late. The remaining engine flared and died. The ship started falling. For a moment, everything slowed. Elias saw the planet spinning below. The dark storm wrapped around it like a serpent. He took a deep breath, steady and calm. We're going down, he said. Brace yourself, the crash was rough. The Falcon hit the ground hard, slid across wet earth, and came to rest half buried in mud. The world went silent except for the hiss of cooling metal. When Lyra opened her eyes, everything hurt. She was still strapped in her seat. The lights flickered weakly. Across from her, Elias was slumped over the controls, blood trickling down the side of his face. Elias, she shouted, struggling to unbuckle. She reached him and checked his pulse. It was weak but steady. Relief flooded through her. She managed to drag him to the back of the cabin, laying him down beside the emergency heater. The outside wind roared, shaking the ship. The temperature was dropping fast. Lyra found a blanket, wrapped it around him, and checked his wounds. Nothing fatal, but he needed rest. She looked around at the cracked cockpit and sighed. We're alive, somehow. Hours passed. The storm raged outside, lightning flashing through the cracks of the hull. Inside, Lyra kept the heater on and cleaned Elias's wounds with trembling hands. Occasionally he stirred, mumbling something she couldn't hear. When he finally opened his eyes, his first words were weak but steady. Dr. Thane, you okay? She smiled softly. You're asking me? You nearly died saving me. He tried to sit up, but she pushed him back down. Don't move. The storm will end by morning. We just need to wait. Elias closed his eyes again, exhaling. You should have left me if it came to that, he murmured. I've already done enough saving for one lifetime. Lyra shook her head, her voice gentle. You didn't just save me from the storm, Elias, you saved hope. That means something. He didn't reply, but a faint smile touched his lips before he drifted back to sleep. Morning came slowly. The light through the storm clouds was pale and golden. The wind had calmed. Outside, the world was quiet. A strange, peaceful silence after the chaos. Lyra stepped out of the ship, her boots sinking into wet soil. The landscape was new, clean, reshaped by the storm. The air smelled fresh. She turned back toward the Falcon and saw Elias standing in the hatchway, leaning on the frame for support. You should be resting, she called out. He smiled faintly. I've had worse mornings. They both looked toward the horizon where the colony's rescue drones were approaching through the mist, small dots of light moving closer. Lyra glanced at him, her voice soft. You didn't just save me from the storm. You saved what comes next. Elias looked at her, confused for a moment, but then he understood. He nodded slowly, eyes tired but peaceful. As the drones drew near, he finally collapsed back into the seat, exhausted. Lyra rushed to him, holding his hand tightly as his eyes fluttered closed again. Now it's my turn, she whispered. Outside, the first rays of sunlight broke through the fading cloud. The storm finally over. The sun of Haven 9 rose over a quiet world. The wild storm that had nearly destroyed the colony was finally gone. The sky, usually full of red clouds and lightning, was clear for the first time in years. The land still smoked in places, broken towers and fallen trees lying across the wet soil. But there was peace in the air, a strange calm after chaos. Inside the main colony hospital, Captain Elias Rourke lay on a medical bed. His right arm was wrapped in bandages and a silver brace supported his ribs. Machines beeped softly beside him, keeping watch. He had been unconscious for 2 days. When he finally opened his eyes, the room was dim. He blinked, trying to remember where he was. Then it came back to him, the storm, the crash, the rescue. The woman. He turned his head slightly and saw Dr. Lyra Thane sitting near the window, reading from a datapad. Her brown hair was tied loosely and her face looked tired but calm. When she noticed his movement, she smiled warmly. You're awake, she said softly, setting the pad aside. I was starting to think you liked sleeping through everything. Elias gave a weak grin. Storms are noisy. Needed some quiet time. His voice was rough, but there was humor in it. She laughed lightly, and for a moment, the heavy silence of the hospital seemed to lift. You saved my life, she said, standing and walking closer. The storm destroyed everything at the outpost. If you hadn't come... She stopped, her voice breaking slightly. Elias shook his head. You would have done the same. It's what we do out here. Save each other. Lyra looked at him quietly for a moment, then smiled again. Well, then I guess it's my turn. You're stuck with me until you recover. Days turned into weeks. Elias wasn't allowed to fly anymore. The doctor said his shoulder needed months to heal. The colony command grounded him officially, saying it was for his own good. For a man like Elias, who had spent his whole life in the skies, that felt like a prison. He spent his mornings sitting by the observation window, watching the ships come and go. He saw young pilots take off, faces full of courage and excitement, and each time, a quiet ache filled his chest. One afternoon, as he stared out at the landing field, he heard a familiar voice behind him. Still counting ships? Lyra asked with a teasing tone. She carried 2 steaming cups. He smiled faintly. Old habit. Can't help it. She handed him a cup. Herbal tea, from the new greenhouse. You should try it. Elias raised an eyebrow. Greenhouse? In this mess of a world? Yes, she said proudly. My team's been growing alien plants that survive the storm. They absorb radiation. I think they might help calm the atmosphere over time. He took a sip. The tea had a strange, clean taste, like rain. So you're telling me plants might fix what machines can't? Lyra grinned. Exactly. Sometimes nature knows better than we do. He looked at her for a moment, then nodded slowly. You're braver than most soldiers I've flown with. She chuckled. I study leaves, Captain. Not exactly heroic, Elias shook his head. Don't underestimate that. You're fighting the same battle, just with science instead of guns. For the first time since the storm, he felt something spark inside, a sense of purpose. Maybe he couldn't fly, but he could still help. Over the next few weeks, Elias began assisting Lyra with her research. He couldn't lift heavy equipment, but he helped with designs, mechanical systems to regulate the plant chambers and power their artificial light fields. He knew machines like he knew his own hands, and soon their partnership became natural. Every morning they met in the lab, surrounded by glowing blue plants that pulsed faintly with light. Lyra explained how these organisms absorbed ion energy from the air, the same energy that powered the deadly storms. If they could multiply the effect, they could calm the planet's atmosphere. One evening, as the lights dimmed, Elias looked at the glowing leaves and said quietly, You think these little things can stop storms? Lyra nodded. Yes, and maybe even prevent them. I call them Thane cells. They drink chaos and give back calm. Elias smiled softly. Sounds like humanity could use a few of those too. She looked at him, eyes shining under the blue light. Maybe that's what you are, Elias. You walk into chaos and somehow you bring calm. He looked away, embarrassed. Didn't feel that way when I crashed your ship. Lyra laughed gently. You still got us both through it. Weeks later, as progress grew, the colony command announced that another massive storm was forming, bigger than any before. It was heading straight for the colony's reactor field, which powered the entire settlement. If it hit directly, the power grid would fail and thousands could die. Lyra rushed into the meeting hall with her notes. We can stop it, she said firmly. My stabilizer system is ready. If we deploy the Thane cells in a network around the storm's edge, it might absorb the energy before it reaches the colony. Commanders exchanged doubtful looks. One of them said, Doctor, your plants aren't tested for this scale. We can't risk our people on an experiment. But doing nothing is worse, she argued. This could work. It's the only chance we have. Elias stood quietly in the back, watching her argue with courage that silenced even the officers. After the meeting, he found her outside, frustration on her face. They won't listen, she said, her voice trembling with anger. All they see is risk. He put a hand gently on her shoulder. Then we'll make them listen. She looked up at him. How? By showing them it works, he said simply. We'll test it ourselves. That night, under a sky glowing with distant lightning, they loaded the stabilizer beacons into a transport rover. The air was tense. The storm was already moving closer, a glowing wall of blue light rolling over the hills. Lyra, Elias said as he adjusted the rover controls, you don't have to do this. We can still pull back, she shook her head. You saved me once. Let me return the favor. This is my work and I have to see it through. He wanted to stop her, but he saw the same fire in her eyes that once drove him to fly through death. So he nodded. "Then I'm coming with you." As they neared the storm's edge, the air buzzed with energy. Dust lifted off the ground and lightning danced above them. Lyra jumped out of the rover, planting the first beacon into the soil. It pulsed with blue light. She moved to the next one, her hair flying wildly in the wind. "Beacon 1 active," she shouted through the radio. "Moving to Beacon 2. Elias stayed near the rover, watching the readings on the console. The storm's energy was fluctuating, some parts weakening, others rising dangerously. He realized with alarm that the storm's center was shifting faster than expected. "Lyra, the storm's moving. You're in the new path. Get back to the rover now." Static crackled through the radio. "Can't yet."
"One more beacon left."
"Lyra, that's an order," he shouted, but the radio went dead. Without thinking, Elias climbed into the rover and sped into the storm. The world outside turned white-blue, the wind slamming against the vehicle. He saw her figure through the haze, struggling to place the last beacon. He jumped out, grabbed her arm, and pulled her back just as a lightning bolt struck nearby, throwing dirt into the air. They fell to the ground together. "Elias," she gasped. "I have to—" "No," he said, eyes fierce. "We'll do it together." He grabbed the beacon, slammed it into the ground, and pressed the activation switch. A deep hum filled the air. All 4 beacons glowed in unison, forming a shimmering ring of blue energy. The storm above them began to break apart, lightning fading, winds calming, the noise turning into silence. For the first time, Haven 9's sky cleared completely. They stood together, soaked and shaking, staring at the calm horizon. Lyra laughed in disbelief, tears mixing with the rain. "It worked." "Elias, it actually worked." He smiled faintly. "Told you plants can do what machines can't." Back at the colony, cheers erupted as they returned. The commander met them at the gate, shaking their hands. "You saved us all," he said with awe. But Lyra turned to Elias, eyes soft. "No," she said quietly. "He saved me again. He always does." Elias smiled. "Guess we're even now." Lyra shook her head gently. "Not even close." As the sun rose over Haven 9, the first calm morning in living memory, the colony celebrated not just survival, but the beginning of something new. A partnership. A hope. And for Elias and Lyra, it was the start of a bond stronger than any storm. 5 years passed since the great storm that nearly destroyed Haven 9. The colony had grown into a shining city under clear skies. The air was fresh, the atmosphere calm, and for the first time in human memory, people could walk outside without fear. The storms were gone, tamed by Dr. Lyra Thane's Thane fields, the glowing energy plants that spread across the land like a soft blue carpet. They had changed everything. What once was chaos had become life. Captain Elias Rourke stood on the balcony of the new command tower, watching shuttles rise into the bright sky. His reflection stared back at him through the glass. Older now, his hair streaked with silver, but his eyes still sharp. Beside him, screens displayed maps of the colony's expansion, mining zones and new habitats built across the plains. He heard footsteps behind him and didn't need to turn. "You walk too softly," he said with a smile. "Trying to sneak up on me again, Doctor?" Lyra laughed gently. "And you still notice every sound, Captain." She stepped beside him, her white lab coat fluttering in the breeze. Her hair was tied back, a few loose strands glowing faintly in the sunlight that passed through the glass roof. She looked different now, confident, wise, and stronger than before. But her eyes still carried that same warm kindness he remembered from the storm. "How's your shoulder?" she asked. Elias rolled it slightly. "Still clicks when the weather changes." She raised an eyebrow. "You mean when the air pressure shifts by 1%? He grinned. "Old pilots can sense it better than machines." They both laughed. The sound soft and familiar. Later that morning, they walked through the colony's central dome, a vast garden filled with glowing plants and gentle streams. Children ran through the paths, their laughter echoing under the glass sky. Lyra watched them, smiling proudly. "It still feels strange," Elias said quietly. "A world that used to try and kill us now gives us flowers." Lyra nodded. "Because we learned to listen to it, not fight it." She picked one of the small blue leaves, watching how it shimmered in her palm. "These plants changed everything, Elias. They made this planet a home." He looked at her thoughtfully. "No, Lyra, you did." She blushed slightly, looking away. You gave me the chance to. That evening, they gathered with the Colony Council for a special broadcast. The event marked the 5th anniversary of the Thane Fields Project, a day of peace after endless storms. Representatives from Earth and nearby colonies were watching through the comm network. As the lights dimmed, Lyra stepped up to the podium. Elias stood nearby, arms crossed, his presence steady as always. Her voice carried clearly through the hall. 5 years ago, this world was almost lost. We faced storms that no machine or shield could stop. But humanity didn't give up. We learned to grow instead of destroy, to adapt instead of control. Haven 9 stands today not because of strength, but because of heart. She paused, her eyes meeting Elias's for a brief moment. And because one man refused to let the storm take another life. The crowd erupted in applause. Elias looked down, slightly embarrassed, but his smile was proud. After the speech, as people celebrated, a young technician ran into the hall, breathless. "Dr. Thane! Captain Rourke! You need to see this!" They followed him quickly to the command center. On the main screen, a massive energy pattern was displayed. A swirling, glowing mass forming far beyond the colony, deep in the eastern hemisphere. It looked like a storm, but much larger, and the readings made no sense. Lyra's eyes widened. That can't be possible. The atmosphere's been stable for years. The technician nodded nervously. We thought it was an error, but it's growing fast. It's different. It's not just energy. It's moving with purpose. Elias stepped closer. Like something alive? The technician swallowed hard. Exactly, sir. It's moving against the wind. Hours later, the colony was on high alert. Drones were launched to study the phenomenon, but none returned. Every transmission cut off mid-signal, as if swallowed by the storm. Lyra and Elias stood together in the operations room, watching the storm's growth on the map. It pulsed like a heartbeat. "This isn't just weather," Lyra whispered. "It's reacting. It's communicating," Elias frowned. "Communicating? With what?" She turned toward him, eyes full of wonder and fear. "With us, maybe. Or with something inside the atmosphere that we don't understand." The Colony Council ordered a full evacuation of nearby zones, but Lyra wasn't ready to give up. She believed the storm was something new, something trying to connect. That night, she went to Elias's quarters. He was sitting by the window, polishing the badge from his old flight jacket. She hesitated before speaking. "I'm going out there," she said softly. He didn't look surprised. "I thought you might say that. I can't let them destroy it, Elias. What if it's intelligent? What if it's trying to talk to us?" He stood and faced her, his expression calm but firm. "Or what if it destroys everything we built? You've already done enough. Let the others handle this." She shook her head. "No, this storm is different. I can feel it. And if there's even a small chance it's alive, I have to understand it." Elias sighed deeply. He had seen that look before. The same fire she had when she ran into the last storm years ago. Nothing could stop her once she decided, so he smiled gently. "Then you'll need a pilot." At dawn, the two of them boarded the Falcon 7, the newest generation of rescue ships. The colony watched as their vessel lifted into the sky, its engines glowing gold in the early light. Inside the cockpit, Lyra checked her instruments. "Communication systems are open. If this storm has any kind of pattern, we'll detect it." Elias adjusted the controls. "Let's hope it wants to talk and not bite." They flew into the heart of the growing storm. The sky turned deep violet, lightning swirling like rivers of energy. The ship shook violently, alarms flashing. Lyra leaned over the console. "Readings off the chart, radiation, magnetic flux, but there's something else." Elias glanced at her. "Something else?" "A signal," she whispered. "It's repeating, almost like a heartbeat." The closer they flew, the clearer it became. A rhythmic pulse of energy, slow and steady, like breathing. Then, through the glowing clouds, they saw it, a giant sphere of light floating in the storm the size of a mountain. It pulsed softly, colors shifting like a living rainbow. Lyra's voice trembled. "It's beautiful." "Elias, it's alive." The ship's systems began to fail. Power flickered, the engines sputtered. Elias gritted his teeth, struggling to keep control. "Lyra, we can't stay long," he shouted. "Just a little longer." She pleaded, fingers flying over the console. "I'm sending a peace signal. Light frequencies, DNA code, human heartbeat rhythm." The storm's glow changed. shifting toward golden hues. The ship stopped shaking. For a moment, everything was calm. The giant sphere pulsed once and the storm began to dissolve, layer by layer, until only clear skies remained. Lyra stared in disbelief. It understood. Elias leaned back, exhausted but smiling. "You did it again, Doctor. You talked down a storm." She laughed softly, tears shining in her eyes.
"No, Elias, we did it. They returned to the colony as heroes once more."
The strange storm never returned, and the skies of Haven 9 stayed calm forever. The event was later called the Silent Dawn, the day the storm finally listened. In the following years, humanity used the Thane field technology across new worlds. Every planet that had storms, chaos, or violent weather began to change under the same blue light that saved Haven 9. Elias and Lyra continued to work together, side by side, leading the expansion into new colonies. They became symbols of courage, not for war or conquest, but for compassion and understanding. On the 10th anniversary of the first storm's end, the colony gathered at the Memorial Garden. A statue stood there, not of soldiers or weapons, but of two figures holding hands looking toward the rising sun. Elias and Lyra stood quietly before it. The wind was gentle, carrying the scent of the glowing flowers. "You know," Elias said softly, "I never thought I'd live long enough to see a calm sky." Lyra smiled. "You didn't just live through it. You made it happen." He shook his head. "No, you saved me every day after that storm. I just tried to keep up." She laughed quietly. "You're still terrible at accepting thanks." He looked at her for a long moment. "And you're still impossible to stop." They both smiled as the first light of dawn touched the horizon. The sun rose higher, bright and clear, and for the first time in human history, Haven 9 was completely still. No storms, no fear, only peace. In the soft morning glow, their shadows stretched long across the garden. Humanity would go on, not because it conquered the stars, but because it learned to listen, to care, and to believe. And somewhere deep inside the memory of the planet, the air itself seemed to whisper, "He saved her once from the storm, but she saved him every day after."